I know what you're thinking. Not another Lord of the Rings video. Well, we all have our roles to play, and in this matter, my role is to say to these woke busybodies,
You shall not pass!
Our new entry for woke projection comes from Polygon, and this long-winded rant by Molly Ostertag claiming that Frodo and Sam are gay because they're friends. Or as Molly says, quote, revisiting the book in the last year, as someone who has been out for many years and who is deeply engaged in making and consuming queer stories, I was amazed to find the same-sex love story at the heart of the narrative. Where? Unlike you, I've read the books every year for nearly 20 years and watched the films well over 100 times. Where is the gay love story? It would be impossible to miss since Tolkien is usually explicit about how characters feel about each other. Where is this mysterious gay love story you found that no one else did? Oh, you mean Frodo and Sam being close friends, or really mirroring the bond between an officer and his servant, his Batman, in the British military? Tolkien included that element in his story, which explains Sam's devotion to Frodo and how he takes care of Frodo and his needs. Tolkien even mentions this in his letters, quote, my Samwise is indeed, as you note, largely a reflection of the English soldier, grafted on the village boys of early days, the memory of privates and my Batmen that I knew in the 1914 war, and recognized as so far superior to myself. To interpret that relationship as sexual when it clearly is not undermines Tolkien's point about the character and quality of the working and rural class and their importance to the war, the community, and their officers. Tolkien loved applicability over allegory, but all the same, that doesn't mean you get to change his intentions to suit your own. He wrote what he wrote for a reason, and he told us why. You don't get to read more into it when he clearly states what he meant. Molly even admits that Tolkien based Frodo and Sam's relationship on Batman, but then says, quote, this basis does not preclude romance. There's at least one novel about a Batman and his officer having a romantic relationship, but this ain't the one. Yes, someone may have written a novel or two out of hundreds of books, and in the real world, some of the Batmen probably did hook up with their officers, but most of them didn't, and there's nothing. Not a single thing in Lord of the Rings to remotely suggest that Frodo and Sam were knocking proud feet. But reality never stops the woke. Quote, there are many relationships between men in the book, most of them platonic. No, all of them are platonic. All of them. Not a single one of the relationships between the men in the books are anything other than friendships or brotherhood. Interpreting things like Sam holding Frodo's hand or touching his hair as sexual is ridiculous when you consider the context. Frodo nearly died. Frodo is carrying an item that's twisting his mind. Sam is comforting Frodo, not trying to shag him. I know this is difficult for some people to understand, but two men can care deeply for each other, and it has nothing to do with sex. We see this during war. We see this with cops and firemen. We see this with athletes. There's a reason we have the phrase closer than brothers. It's not sexual. It's just a very intense bond. And it's often expressed by physical contact. A hug, kissing the forehead, holding hands, resting on each other. Yes, in our modern society this might get read as being gay, but anyone who checks history will see these types of things were done throughout every society. It's extremely common to the point that it gets encoded in mythology, like with Gilgamesh and Enkidu or David and Jonathan. You're reading way more into this bond than is there, and it doesn't just taint those stories, it also prevents real men and boys from forming those bonds out of fear they may be labeled gay. We've seen this with young men and boys having fewer friendships, especially friendships of any meaning. If the moment they show any emotional connection it will be read as a come on, a lot of men and boys won't form those strong friendships. It also makes it worse for gay men and boys because if they really are just trying to be someone's friend, it could be misinterpreted, resulting in them having to fend off an unwanted suitor or someone who hates them because they're gay. You're also making gay men and boys less likely to form strong friendships with straight men and boys out of fear that their own intentions might be misinterpreted. You're creating more problems by projecting sexuality onto everything And the damning part is, Molly is either a lesbian or a transformer. So according to the GLBTQ MNOP plus asterisk hashtag up down left right whole day press start rules as of July 2021, her opinion doesn't matter cause she ain't even a man. Speaking of bizarre leaps in logic, Molly tries to use Tolkien's writing device as proof of Frodo and Sam being booty bandits. She claims that since the story of Lord of the Rings is based on accounts later shared with and written down by Bilbo and then Frodo in the Red Book of the West March, quote, it's an authorial invitation to look between the lines and search for hidden truths. The narrator becomes part of the fiction. History, after all, is recorded by specific people with their own motives, something that Tolkien, as one of the world's foremost Beowulf scholars, would have intimately understood. It was a conscious choice on the part of Frodo and Sam to include the many moments when they expressed their love for each other, and it reads in much the same way people from the past delicately refer to their same-sex relationships, wanting to acknowledge their truth while obeying the conventions of their time. Or, it happened just the way they described, since the purpose of the book was to record what actually happened to the best of their recollection. All we would need to do is look at the other relationships Tolkien wrote about to see if they were handled the same way, and it turns out they weren't. When Tolkien wanted to show a man and a woman, or an elf and a woman, or a man and an elf maiden fell in love, he didn't dance around it. He was very clear in what he meant. Now, Molly admits that straight relationships are pretty sparse in the text, and this leads to a very basic question. If Tolkien barely mentions any intimate relationships, why would he suddenly focus on a gay relationship? And why would this relationship not be a reflection of other relationships from the past? Tolkien constantly echoed relationships, Beren and Luthien, Tuor and Idril, Erendil and Elwig, Aragorn and Arwen. He does this with friendships as well, with Finrod and Barahir, Turin and Beleg, Gimli and Legolas. So what's more likely, that Tolkien was secretly mirroring the gay version of Beren and Luthien with Frodo and Sam, as Molly claims, or that he was mirroring the friendships he'd written about but hadn't published yet, and the Batman and officer bond that he explicitly said he was using. It doesn't mean the parallels between the tales, Beren losing his hand, Frodo a finger, Beren and Frodo both being trapped in towers, Luthien and Sam both insisting on going on the journey, don't exist, but that doesn't mean the relationships are the same. Tolkien was very specific in what he did when it came to that sort of thing, making it obvious in order to illustrate that the new thing harkened back to an old thing. But Molly doesn't like that. The truth is too much of a problem, so Molly tries again to claim that because something was done by another writer, it must therefore have been done by Tolkien too. Quote, if you're a certain type of Lord of the Rings reader, you're probably yelling, Tolkien was a Catholic born in the Victorian era. He would never have written about gay people. But there are examples of queerness in Tolkien's time and place, and any speculation is backed by historical context, but not by Tolkien or in his writings. Just because other people wrote about gay shit doesn't mean Tolkien did it too. That's not how this works. Was he aware that some men fancy other men? Probably. As Molly mentions, one of the Inklings, Tolkien's group of friends, was gay. He was friends with and a fan of Mary Rinwald, who wrote several gay-themed novels. None of that is evidence, though, that Frodo and Sam were secretly written as gay. There's nothing in the published text, Tolkien's notes, the drafts published by his son, or his letters that even hint at the idea. Trying to read more into Tolkien's work than what's there, especially things like Bilbo being a bachelor or Tolkien using the word queer, meaning strange, or Legolas and Gimli's friendship, is just pulling at straws. They're not gay. Lord of the Rings isn't some hidden metaphor about being gay, and nothing you say will change that. If you would like to apply aspects of the story to your gayness, Tolkien invites you to do this. He preferred people to use applicability over allegory, but, like I said before, you don't get to change his intentions to suit your own. He meant what he meant, and he told us what he meant with Frodo and Sam's relationship multiple times. The most bizarre part of this, though, is that we know Sam is not only straight, but specifically who he's attracted to. Rosie Cotton, who he's too afraid to approach at the beginning of the story, but after he gets back and saves the Shire, he marries her. Sam's love for Rosie is repeatedly mentioned in the book by him and the other hobbits, so how in the world can Sam be gay? Molly tries to spin this by claiming, quote, Samwise the Brave gets the hero's reward, wife and family, pastoral bliss, with the understanding that it would be no reward at all if he didn't get to live with Frodo. Sam and Rosie's marriage, and the other two that close out the book, indicate a future for Middle-earth in the form of a new generation. But as Tolkien notes in another letter, the greatest of romances do not tell of a happy marriage of such lovers, but of their tragic separation. And that is the logic he applies to the central romance of his book. No, that's the bullshit you're applying to his story by misquoting him. Since I know the woke love to lie, I looked up the quote Little Miss Molly cited, and wouldn't you know it has zero to do with sexuality. The quote is from a letter discussing soulmates and marriage. Quote, only a very wise man at the end of his life could make a sound judgment concerning whom, amongst the total possible chances, he ought most profitably to have married. Nearly all marriages, even happy ones, are mistakes, in the sense that almost certainly, in a more perfect world, or even with a little more care in this very imperfect one, both partners might have found more suitable mates. But the real soulmate is the one you are actually married to. The context for the line Molly misquoted is this, quote, the idea still dazzles us, catches us by the throat. Poems and stories in multitude have been written on the theme, more probably than the total of such loves in real life. Yet the greatest of these tales do not tell of a happy marriage of such great lovers, but of their tragic separation, as if even in this sphere, the truly great and splendid in this fallen world is more nearly achieved by failure and suffering. In such great inevitable love, often love at first sight, we catch a vision, I suppose, of a marriage as it should have been in an unfallen world. In this fallen world, we have as our only guides prudence, wisdom, rare in youth to late in age, a clean heart, and fidelity of will. Molly, just a quick word of advice. If you're gonna lie about a quote, make sure the full quote isn't the first link you see when you search for it. Look, I get it. You're gay, or trans, or both, or neither, and you feel different and alone, and you want to see people like you in the things you enjoy. But that doesn't mean everything you encounter is or has to be like you. You may be hiding your sexuality. You may be using coded language to signal that you think you're the opposite sex, but that doesn't mean everyone else is doing the same thing. Every story isn't about you, and every story doesn't include you, and it doesn't have to. You're supposed to look at those stories and apply aspects of them to your life. You're not supposed to look at a story and project your life and beliefs onto it, trying to force it to conform to what you want it to be. Frodo and Sam's friendship is a magnificent thing. Sam's devotion to and love of Frodo is so powerful that he's willing to stay with Frodo even after Frodo gives into the ring. But such is Sam's love that is part of the reason, if not the reason, Frodo doesn't turn sooner. It's Sam who keeps Frodo grounded, who reminds him of his humanity, or hobbitness, who pushes Frodo to keep fighting. Their bond is so powerful that it holds back one of the most powerful things ever created in Middle-earth, the power of the One Ring. Don't taint that bond, that friendship, that love, by turning it into something that it's not. But what do I know? I'm just some guy.